Hello and welcome back to Growing Older and Wiser. I'm Krista Gibson. So today I want to talk about kind of a favorite topic of mine. I call it living life as an adventure rather than as a to-do list. When I was in my 20s, it was in my late 20s and it was before I got involved in metaphysics, I read a quote from Helen Keller, and she said, "Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all." And it hit me so strongly. I wrote it down and I would keep it up in front of me at work at my desk so I would remember that my day could be an adventure. I've carried that with me for the last 50 years and I still live that way. You know, if life isn't an adventure, what are we here for? And then yesterday I saw a quote I want to read to you from Emerson. He said, "Don't be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better." And I thought, that's similar. Life is an adventure or nothing at all. So my question to you is, what kind of adventure are you living now? And now that you are older, and I don't know your ages, I know some of you are in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We cover a broad spectrum here. Maybe some of you are even in your 50s. I don't know. It doesn't matter, because you can start living your life as an adventure anytime you want to. And if you stop and think about it, even if your life is dull by social standards, which mine certainly would be now, that's not true a few years ago, but now people would say, you know, I live a boring life. Well, I'm glad it's not their life, but you know, you can have things come out of the blue. Like this past weekend, I had plans of what I was going to do, and I was going to do some watercolor painting and so on and so forth. And our disposal blocked up, the sink blocked up. I spent 2 hours trying to unblock it. Don't have a snake anymore because it was old and rusted, so we didn't bring it with us when we moved. So I ended up calling the plumber, and fortunately we have a contract type deal where you pay so much per month and you don't pay for service calls. You pay for the repair, but not for the service call itself. Anyway, he came out and he snaked it and cleaned the trap and did all of that. And everything's fine, but it was a good 3-4 hours out of my day that didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. So that was an adventure. It was an adventure to meet him. It was an adventure to ask him about what he was doing and why. And so I decided to take it that way. Was I tickled pink that it happened? No. And, you know, I'm making sure. He was hilarious because he said, you know, I tell my clients the best way to not have a problem with your disposal system is don't use it. And I'm like, I said, I just lived the last 30 years in a house without a disposal. I said, do you know how wonderful this is for me to have one? We had a place to compost. We could do all those things. I don't have it now. So I said, this is a delight for me. I said, we'll just have to be more careful that we run the water long enough. Anyway, that was my adventure. Well, anyway, you get to pick how you respond to things like that. You know, I call it being a fossil. And Thomas More in his book, I've got it over here. Oh, Ageless Soul, this book here, which I've told you about before. Fabulous, fabulous book. One of the things he says is, you know, don't be a fossil. I love that. You know, I like fossils. I have some fossils, but I don't want to be a fossil. And one of the ways you keep from being a fossil is that you live with intention, and you stay awake, and you're aware of what's going on in the world and aware of what's going on around you. And if you are, what an adventure we're in right now. I mean, you couldn't write this stuff if you were writing a novel. Some of the things going on in the world today, it's like, where is this coming from? And you and I both know where that's coming from, but that's a whole other video. But to be able to receive it with that sense of adventure and to feel your life having a sense of adventure is fabulous. One of the ways I like to look at it is, you know, when I'm going along my day and something comes in to interrupt it or change it, I like to think about the days when I used to hike. And I think of other people who hike. And you have a plan, usually. You kind of know where you're going because you don't want to get lost. And, you know, tell other people where you're going. And you try to look the area out and see kind of what might you be coming up against. But It happens. You come across a huge tree in the path that you can't go around or over, or you come to the edge of a cliff and you have to go over by a river. There's things that happen you aren't expecting. And so when I say to people, do you just stop the hike at that point? Of course not. You find a way around, above, below, around, whatever, and it's part of the adventure of hiking or taking a walk or climbing a mountain. Speaking of, I have to tell you about a resident that I had at the retirement community when I was manager of a retirement community, and I'm going to call her Mary, not her real name. She was 94 years old and very statuesque, very thin, but very statuesque. And she and I, we would talk at different times. And at the point that I'm going to tell you about, that she was talking to me specifically, she told me, I'm 94 years old. I've got breast cancer. I've got other things wrong with me. She said, my family wants me to have an operation. She said, at 94? She said, I've lived such a wonderful life. She said, I used to be very athletic. She said, I used to climb mountains. I was very much an outdoors woman. She said, you wouldn't believe some of the things that I did that I can't do anymore. But she said, I loved them when I did them. And those are things, she said, I will always have. But she said, I'm not going to get to do them anymore. And she said, I see absolutely no point in my going through surgery at 94 years of age to do what? To hang on for another couple of years? She used to joke, in retirement communities in Washington State, and I suspect other places, if a resident dies, the staff has to give CPR until the medics get there. You have to. There's no choice. And it's a state law. If you don't do it, you can be closed down. The reason why is because the staff are not doctors. The staff, even though we had nurses and LPNs and LVNs, all of that, they weren't doctors. And so they were not qualified. I certainly was not qualified to call death. And so because of that, even if they appeared to be dead, you had to give them CPR. One time, a doctor got really angry with me. He called me and he read me the riot act. He said, my patient had died and your nurse kept giving him CPR and brought him back. And how dare you do that? And I said, doctor, you need to take that up with the state of Washington, not me. I said, we have rules that we have to go by. And one of those rules is that if somebody dies, we have to give CPR. You know why? Because we're not doctors. We are not allowed to call death. Now, we do try to get 911 there as soon as we possibly can, but just so you know, we have to do it. Well, Margaret, she knew that, and she had been there long enough to know that. She said, you know what, Krista, I'm going to have a tattoo made across my chest. Do not resuscitate. So we had a good laugh over that. And I said, you can do that, Marg, but we still have to do it. It's a state law. We don't want to be closed down, right? So I said, it's a state law. But one of the things that really impressed me about her was her ability to look at her life at 94 and feel good about it and say, and she told me her exact words, she said, I've lived a long life, I've lived a good life, and when it's time to die now, let me go. She said, let me go. I'm ready to move on. The other last thing I'll tell you about her, because I want to say a few other things, but we had a no smoking rule. Well, Margaret was very strong-willed, shall we say, and I would get complaints from the woman who lived in the apartment below Margaret. She said, I keep smelling cigarette smoke. I just know I do, and I don't smoke. So I would go up to Margaret's apartment and knock, knock, knock. Margaret, are you smoking? No, Krista. I said, Margaret. And she would laugh and I would laugh. And she said, well, I hide in the bathroom and I turn the fan on to get the smell out. And I said, Margaret, when you turn the fan on, you're making the smoke go to the apartment below you. And then that woman complains, so I know you're smoking. So I said, go outside. Just go outside. I mean, if you need to smoke, go outside. Please don't smoke inside. Anyway, that was dear, dear Margaret. Bless her heart. The other thing I want to talk about is we can carefully plan our day like I did last Saturday, and a monkey wrench will be thrown into it. I like to look at this as living your life loosely, and I've talked about this If not here, then it might living with grace and ease is living with an open hand. Instead of clutching your day, it has to go my way, it has to be a certain way. Living with a sense of adventure means living with an open hand, saying, okay, this is kind of how I'm planning my day, but truth is, I have no idea what's going to happen at 2 o'clock this afternoon. What phone call will I get? Will the toilet get plugged up? Whatever. Is there going to be something happening outside that I'm going to be looking at? But to live with that attitude, that sense of adventure, that sense of surprise, that sense of being open to having delightful things. They don't all have to be negative surprises. They can be very positive surprises. So you can say, okay, I'm going to live with a sense of adventure and the expectation that the interruptions I have, the changes of plans that I have, that they're all surprises, pleasant surprises. Live with a sense of adventure. Get off the to-do list train and get on the train every day. When you get up, say, I wonder what wonderful, delightful surprises are in store for me today. And I live my life with a sense of adventure and a sense of wonder. Have a great week.